Hello and welcome back to Flashy and Puddles. I'm your host, Puddles. Today we're going to be talking about probably the biggest part of endgame content in WoW, raids. Raiding has been a core endgame feature in WoW since its initial release back in 2004, where it had only Molten Core in Onyxia's lair. Since then, the game has obviously grown, and with it comes new raids. Currently, there are 39 raids that you can access in the live version of the game, including the raids in Legion with Emerald Nightmare, Trial of Valor, Nighthold, Tomb of Sargeras, and Antorus the Burning Throne. So, what is a raid? Well, as I said before, a raid is a core part of the endgame content in WoW in the main player versus environment or PvE endgame content. Generally, raids will tie up the storyline of a patch or introduce new things for a patch, such as Illidan opening a giant portal to Argus at the end of the Tomb of Sargeras raid. This both ended the Broken Isles content of 7.0 through 7.25 and introduced the Argus content of 7.3 and onwards. Raids are also very rewarding for players that are not interested in the storyline, as they can provide a challenge for players of any skill level and will reward the players with a decent amount of gear in return. There are 4 tiers or difficulties for each raid. The first tier and the easiest is LFR. You can sign up for LFR just like you sign up for a normal or heroic dungeon, and the game will place you in a group automatically. This is a good place to start for new raiders as it's very forgiving and people kind of expect you to mess up. The next tier is normal. Normal raiding has more mechanics than LFR, and the mechanics are very different from LFR. In addition, the groups are usually a lot smaller than LFR, generally using 14 to 18 people as opposed to LFR's 25 people. I would consider this the first real raiding experience that people will go into, as LFR is more of a glorified dungeon. You also have a flexible group size in normal Legion raids. Next is Heroic. Heroic is more difficult than normal, with more mechanics and harder hitting mechanics, but is not as big a jump as between LFR and normal. This is the final tier that a casual player will probably get through. Heroic also has a flexible group size. Lastly is Mythic. This is a huge jump from Heroic in terms of difficulty. Mythic will require a good guild to even get in, as you cannot sign up for current Mythic raids in the group finder. Mythic is more for hardcore players, and as such I don't raid Mythic. Mythic has a hard player requirement of 20 players. Other than just the difference in mechanics, there is no way to queue for any raid difficulty other than LFR. You need to manually be invited to a group. This is one reason why so many people like being in a good guild, as this can almost guarantee them a spot in most raids, provided the guild isn't too big. This is not to say that you cannot progress through current content alone, just be prepared for rejection in trying to find a group. Also, communication is key in raiding, even on normal difficulty. Many guilds will have a voice chat program such as Discord, so that they can communicate with one another easily. So, how does one get into a raid? Well, for starters, you need to be geared up for it. People running raids will generally look for a minimum item level, and it varies from person to person and raid to raid. Even if you decided to run your own raid, people would still look at your gear, see that they would be carrying you, and may leave. You can't even sign up for LFR of the first raid in Legion until you hit item level 825. After that, the item level requirements get higher and higher until you reach Antorus, which requires item level 890 to even sign up for LFR. Even if you can sign up for and complete LFR difficulty, don't expect to leap right into normal. Not only is there a jump in item level, but as I said before, there's also a massive jump in mechanics. Some fights in LFR don't even resemble their normal fights. For instance, the Maiden of Vigilance fight in the Tomb of Sargeras is missing 3 key mechanics in LFR that she has in normal, and if any one of these are performed incorrectly even on normal, you could severely harm the raid if not cause a wipe. As such, I strongly recommend looking up a specific guide for that fight. You can either go text-based on Icy Veins or Wowhead, or with a video guide. For a video guide, I recommend a YouTube channel called fatboss.tv. Their guides are usually very in-depth, and they know what they're talking about. So you've watched a guide, and you're all geared up and ready for raiding. So we're going to go into LFR for your very first raid. As I said before, many people don't really consider this to be raiding, but it is a good place to get your feet wet. This is also a good place to learn the group dynamics in a raid. For DPS, not much has changed for you from a dungeon to a raid. All you need to worry about are the added mechanics and killing enemies. You should also learn what your survival cooldowns are and how and when to use them. The reason being that the healers will always be prioritizing the tanks, then other healers, and then the DPS, and there are quite a few of you, so it may be a while until they get to you. Plus, in a situation where you're taking damage, the tanks will probably be taking an impressive amount of damage, and the healers will probably also be taking damage. For healers and tanks, you now need to learn how to play well with others, as you now have multiple healers and a second tank. For healers, this is fairly straightforward, as you simply add on to the healing of the other players. You do have to make sure that you coordinate your cooldowns though. You don't want to all blow all of your cooldowns at once and then be left with nothing. A good raid leader will be able to time the cooldowns appropriately. Of course, this doesn't really matter in LFR. Also, you want to know and be familiar with your own personal defensive cooldowns, as you do need to stay alive through the fight, even with a lot of incoming damage. Oh, and fights in raids will normally last a lot longer than fights in dungeons, so as such you need to keep an eye on your mana and make sure you don't run out. For tanks, it's a bit of a difference. You just need to coordinate who has the boss when, as there will be times when you actually don't want to take the boss. Generally, you will want to pick up the boss after a certain number of stacks of some debuff, and the current tank is heavily reliant on the other tank to taunt it off of them. DBM will also tell you when to taunt, but DBM can be off at times, so just watch out for that. You should definitely read or watch a guide if you're going to be raid tanking. So you're probably going to blow through your first LFR with very little communication or coordination. I like to think of LFR as bumper cars, where people are all running around and no one's communicating and everything is chaos, but you're all having fun. Now eventually you will want to move on to normal. If LFR is like bumper cars, then normal is like driving a car. You need to communicate your actions to the other drivers to avoid collisions and follow the rules of the road. You will encounter a few things in normal that are almost unheard of in LFR. The first, which is pretty self-explanatory and I have mentioned it before, is voice chat. Generally, after a month or two of a raid being out, people will stop requiring voice chat for normal raids, but some groups still do. If a raid requires a voice chat, you better be prepared to get into it. Most groups use Discord nowadays as it's free and you don't have to download anything if you don't want to. If a group uses Discord, they will post a link in their chat to a Discord server. You can either enter this into any web browser, or if you have the Discord client installed, enter it into there. Another thing in normal that is rarely if ever used in LFR are personal buffs. These come from three main sources: runes, food, and flasks. These provide a slight buff to your character to help them fill their role more effectively. You can buy all of these on the auction house or obtain runes from bosses and make flasks and food. Flasks are made with the alchemy skill, and food is made with the cooking skill. The next is a ready check. You may have seen these before, especially in Mythic Plus dungeons or maybe an LFR raid. In short, the raid leader puts out a request to all players to see if they're ready or not. Simply click ready if you're ready or not ready if you're not ready. If you leave the window up for a while, you will automatically be marked as not ready. This is usually used in two cases. The first is when starting a boss fight and making sure that all players are ready to engage. The second is when the group is returning from a break to see who's back or not. Another thing present in normal that is hardly used in LFR, and if it is usually ignored, is a pull timer. Pull timers are pretty self-explanatory. They're timers with a big countdown right in the middle of your screen that help to coordinate pulls. Generally, you want to start attacking on 0 unless you're the tank, in which case you might want to go in with about half a second left on the pull timer. After you have normal down pat, you can move on to heroic, and maybe even mythic. All that the new difficulties add are more mechanics and harder hitting enemies. If normal is like driving a car, then heroic is like driving a car with a standard transmission. In theory, they're the same thing, but with a few extra things that you need to keep track of. So I still haven't mentioned how you actually get into a raid group for normal and higher. This is where the pre-made group finder comes in. Of course, if you're in a raiding guild, just ask your GM how you can sign up for raids. In the pre-made group finder, there are 5 basic categories. You're going to want to look at the Raid's Legion category. Under this category, you can find groups forming for all 5 of the current raids. If you want to look for a specific raid, you simply go up to the search bar and begin typing in what you want to group up for. In this case, we're going to look for a normal and Taurus group for my Warlock here. Once you hit enter, the filter will be applied. You will want to read each description and look at what the group needs. Generally, a group will post their desired composition and required item level in the title or description. As far as composition, you will normally see 3 numbers separated by slashes, the most common ones being 239 and 2412. These numbers represent the desired number of tanks, healers, and DPS in order. So a group looking for 239 would be looking for 2 tanks, 3 healers, and 9 DPS. So after you've found a group that you want to join, you need to sign up for that group. Because this next part is all depending on the raid leader, you may or may not be accepted into the group. You can sign up for up to 5 groups at a time, but can only be accepted into 1. Once you get accepted into a raid group, you will need to make your way to the entrance of the raid, or you can be summoned. If a group has a warlock, they will probably summon you. Either way, you should always make your way towards the entrance just in case, if for no reason other than it's just good manners to do so. And now that you're physically at the raid, this is where this guide ends and guides specific to that raid take over. In other words, that's all for this video. If you have any questions or you feel like I didn't cover something correctly, please leave a comment down below. If you like what I'm doing and would like to see more of it, please like and subscribe. Other than that, have a wonderful day, everyone.